Have you ever read a critical reasoning question with a ton of numerical information in it and felt overwhelmed or simply lost track of what it was talking about? This is an issue that comes up a lot among GMAT students. Even though you know that you need both quant skills and verbal skills to do well on the GMAT, it often feels like the verbal section won't expect any quant from you. Or perhaps you think doing some calculations will waste too much time on a simple critical reasoning question. Here's the thing. That is usually the case. Most verbal questions won't expect much in the way of calculations. However, for the handful that do, trying to solve them without simply picking example numbers can end up taking way longer and leaving more room for error than starting with a quant approach in the first place. This difference in questions can be hard to spot. I am going to demonstrate with a TTP question that I personally find much easier to solve with test numbers and show you how to pick a good test number. During each of the past 2 years, Bananvia consumed 50% of the oranges that it produced that year and exported the other 50%. Either in the form of whole fruit or in the form of orange juice. As compared with the orange production 2 years ago, last year, the total production of oranges in Bananvia was 15% lower. All the same, last year, Bananvia exported the same amount of orange juice that it exported the year before. If the statements above are true, which of the following must also be true? So we are looking for an inference answer here because it's something that must be true. Let's break down the premises that we're looking for support in. During each of the past 2 years, Bananvia consumed 50% of the oranges that it produced and exported the other 50%. There are 2 ways in which the Bananvians export oranges, in the form of whole oranges and in the form of orange juice. When we compare the orange production of last year with the orange production of the year before, last year's production was 15% lower than that of the year before. And finally, the passage clarifies that the same amount of orange juice was exported in each of the 2 years. Notice a couple of things about this example. First, it deals with years relative to the current year. I find it's much easier to keep track of this sort of time framing if I look at problems like this from my perspective in time. So I am filming this in 2025. So last year is 2024 and the year before last is 2023 for me. By dropping all of the last year, year before last, 2 years ago, and using real numbers in your notes, it's less writing for you and it's way easier to keep track of. So let's fix that. Second, we know that they export oranges in the form of whole fruits or orange juice. They probably also consume oranges in those 2 forms, but we're not given the specific breakdown of how much they consume in each form. So the oranges that they consume is all one big group, and the fruit that they export is one group that's broken into 2 smaller groups. I find it helpful to jot down a little chart like this so I can see the flow of what's happening to the product and I don't get turned around in the answers. Those are the 2 big things I would do when breaking this down. Let's look at our choices. Last year, Bananvia consumed less than 50% of the orange juice that it produced. Thanks to our little flow chart, we know that this isn't something that we know about. Production dropped 15% and the same amount of juice was exported both years. Maybe Bananvians consumed less than half of its juice, but we don't know anything about how much juice was produced, only that the amount that was exported was the same each year. We don't know if they consume any juice. We don't know if they consume all of their oranges and juice. This choice is not fully supported. Last year, the average price of oranges in Bananvia was higher than it was the year before. B wants us to assume that less supply equals higher prices. That is classic supply and demand logic, but the passage says nothing about pricing, so this is not going to work for us. Last year, Bonanvia exported a smaller quantity of oranges in the form of whole fruit than it exported during the year before. This seems like it might take some math. We are going to put a pin in it and come back. It is more profitable for Bonanvian orange producers to export orange juice than to export oranges in the form of whole fruit. This choice talks about profitability, and we don't have any data on profitability, so this is way out of scope for us. Bonanvian orange producers' revenue from exported orange juice last year was the same as the revenue from exported orange juice the year before. But just because the same quantity of juice was exported doesn't mean the revenue was the same. Prices could have changed. We don't have any price info, as I mentioned before, so we don't have anything to support a conclusion about revenue. The other answers don't seem so great. Let's go back to C and pick some test numbers. Unlike picking test numbers in data sufficiency, we don't necessarily have to test a bunch of different number types. For instance, in data sufficiency, it's advisable to test a positive and negative integer, a positive and negative fraction, and zero in a lot of cases. In this example, we are specifically talking about units of fruit, so you cannot have negative units of fruit, and you can't really have fractional units of fruit. We really just need to test a positive integer. Also, the units decrease by 1%. There's not so much room for zero. When choosing a test number, what would be ideal is we want to pick something that will split evenly. So it should be an even number. And ideally, 85% of it should also be an even number. I'm going to go with 40. So let's say Bonanvians produced 40 total oranges. They consumed 20, which is 50%. They exported the other 20, and they exported 10 of the oranges in juice form and 10 of the oranges in whole fruit. So 10 plus 10 plus 20 equals 40 total oranges. This is for 2023 and 2024. They only produced 85% as many oranges. So we'll say that they exported 17 and consumed 17. We know that they kept the same amount of juice, so 10, and that leaves us with only 7 oranges for export as whole fruits. Let's see. Is 7 less than 10? Why, yes, it is. So in this case, C is true. Now, if you wanted to, for fun, test the zero where we can say that they exported 20 oranges, consumed 20 oranges, but 0 of the oranges were exported in juice form. So they exported 20 out of 20 oranges in whole fruit form in 2023. In 2024, that would leave us with the equivalent number of juice oranges, which is 0. And it knocks our whole orange exports down to 17. Is 17 less than 20? Why, yes, it is. Thus, C is still true. Interesting. This is all the numbers I would test, and it's very thorough. But you will see that C holds true in any test because each year half the orange crop is exported. Last year there were fewer oranges than there were the year before, since the amount of orange juice exported didn't change and the total quantity exported had to be smaller due to lower production. The only thing that could have decreased is the amount of whole fruit exported. The implications of that are fairly simple to see with some numbers, but I just think that they're a lot harder to be confident in without testing some numbers. This was an inference question. Inference questions are more likely than many other question types to rely on mathematical support. So if you see an inference stem and a question full of numerical information, that's one sign to prime yourself for possible calculations. A key part of doing well on GMAT verbal questions is to stay flexible. Even if you almost never use hard calculations in verbal, keeping an open mind will allow you to pivot if necessary or if it's a more efficient approach. Until next time.